Hello, I'm Scott Thompson, and welcome to After 10. Major figures from the global music industry converged on Seoul last week for MUCON 2013 to network, discuss new trends, and perhaps even find the world's next big music star. On today's After 10, we talk music with one of the participants of MUCON 2013, the Director for Market Development in Asia for Fender, Perkins.
To help promote Korean music to the overseas market, the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism, along with the Korea Creative Content Agency, hosted the second annual MUCON Fair this year. World-renowned figures in music attended, and it became a place for exchanging knowledge and ideas about the industry. The MUCON name combines music with content, connection, conference, and contemporary. Following up on last year's success, major figures from the global music industry held conferences and business exchange opportunities. Musical acts also had the opportunity to showcase their talents. The Director for Market Development in Asia from global musical instrument manufacturer Fender, Perkins. He opened MUCON with a keynote interview with world-renowned producer Steve Lillywhite, who has produced for some of the world's most famous bands, including U2 and the Rolling Stones.
Mr. Perkins, thank you very much for being on the show.
It's my pleasure, Scott.
Now, Fender was a sponsor for MUCON 2013. I assume that most people in the audience have heard of Fender and know about Fender, but for those a select few out there that may not be all that familiar with the company, tell us about it.
Well, Fender has a very rich history and heritage that goes back over 70 years as a company that's been renowned and very well known for its guitar making. Fender actually invented the electric bass, which is where we put our start from, but we've been involved in electric guitars for many years. And the rich heritage has continued throughout the decades, from the 50s, 60s, right through to even the decade that we're in now. And I think that more and more people are aware of the history of Fender and the heritage of Fender, and it's becoming more closer and acceptable to a lot of people more in Asia now, which is great for us.
And Fender was a sponsor for MUCON 2013. How did that relationship come about?
Yeah, that was basically, I met KOCA, the Korean agency for creative content, in Singapore, actually, because I'm based in Singapore, and there's a music event in Singapore called Music Matters. And I think the Korean government have been very keen on developing their own version of a music conference and a music festival to draw people from outside of Korea into Korea. And KOCA have been very, very approachable about this. And of course, when they found out that Fender were present in the region, they felt it would be very valuable to have Fender's involvement. We had discussions over coffee. I drink tea, but we had discussions over some drinks, and it was very straightforward that we would like to be involved in the conference last week. And for us, it was very valuable.
Your job description as Director for Market Development is about that, right? About getting out into the markets and getting your name out there and doing that sort of thing. Tell us a little bit about what you do on a daily basis.
Well, I travel a lot. And I'm not saying that that's bad or good. It's part of the job, and I enjoy traveling and I enjoy meeting people. And the great thing about going to places like Korea or Indonesia, or my next trip will be India, it's really good to meet the people in their domains, where they operate, where they perform, you know, especially the artist. You know, 9 times out of 10, in fact 99% of the time, when I meet an artist, I'm meeting him in a studio, or I'm meeting him at a venue or a coffee shop. It's never a formal come to my office type meeting. It's very informal because musicians are that way inclined. So traveling a lot is part of the role, and seeing the markets actually face up, really actually understanding that this is what's going on in that country. Going to a conference, you can get so much, and it's fantastic because it builds it takes you from inertia to actually say, right, there's things we should go and see. But being there is so much different. So that's what I've been doing over the last 8 months. A lot of travel. Singapore is part of our market. Of course, I pivot from Singapore every time I go to different parts of the world. Another thing that's very important for Fender is best practice. And you know, with a heritage that Fender has and an operation that we have in America, I want to leverage from our great things that we do in America, the great things we do in Europe, and bring those to the Asian market. It's not specifically saying that Asia is any different. It's not. Musicians are human beings wherever they are in the world. They want to buy Fender, they want to play Fender. So bringing a lot of what we do, the great things that we do from our corporate office and from our regions, is another initiative that I intend to do very soon.
One of the, I think, underlying things that you've been talking about so far is that the music industry really is about the people. One of the things that Fender is also involved in that you alluded to there was looking for fresh, new talent. How exactly does that process go about? Tell us what Fender is doing on that front.
Yeah, fresh new talent, and you know, there's an abundance of fresh new talent in Asia. It is where the future of music is. And that's why a lot of people are looking at Asia at the moment. I mean, Steve Lillywhite was at the conference last week, and one of his reasons for being here is to find new talent. And you know, that was something we were very keen to be associated with when we worked with Steve Lillywhite. Finding fresh talent actually is very easy. You just have to get out of your hotel room and go to a bar. And not just hotel bar or go to a bar where there's someone playing cover music. You've got to go to some of the places where these bands are playing. And you can be so amazed at what you see. Last week during MUCON, there were lots of amazing bands that I saw that I'd never seen before. That's the great thing about a conference. But when you go into a country, you find that there are events going on all the time. Western artists are coming to Asia, so we know that. And there's a lot of strong Western performances in various countries. In Korea, for instance, the summer festival season is a big festival season in the whole of Asia. And a lot of Western artists come. But there are 30% Western artists and 70% local artists or Asian artists. That's the thing that we're looking out for. Emerging is this very interesting word because, you know, when I was 17, I was emerging. And the belief you have in music is what you look for when you're starting out. You want that, this is the only thing I know. I cannot do anything else. I want to be a star. And you might not ever get there, but your intention is to try. And seeing that sort of catalyst and that spark in Asian artists is there, and that's what excites me about this market.
You talk about Asia sort of being the new frontier for the music industry, an emerging market. You talk about the artists there. What do you see, though, in particular in Asia that really excites you or interests you, and you look at it and you say, this really could be something moving forward? What are the trends you see?
I think that, you know, without getting too political, you know, Asia has had governments that have been very much in control of the way operations of a nation has been going through. And that's fine, you know, and things are changing. And what's happening in Asia and, of course, around the world is that young people are beginning to get out of their bedrooms and stand up a little bit. And I think it's that spark, seeing that spark in the eye of some of the Asian artists, it reminds me so much of when I was 17. So that's nothing unique. It's very much similar to the way a Western artist would start out, and they're doing exactly the same today. I think there are some very interesting things about the cultural connections with musical instruments. And I think that when you think of, you know, the guitar and the acoustic guitar being a hollow-bodied product and an electric guitar being solid body with electronics built in there, there are a lot of cultural instruments that don't have these aspects except hollow-bodied strings, very, very much a synergy in the instrumentation. And what's interesting is it's not this East meets West. It's not that at all. It's just music. And it's ensuring that people play instruments. And we still see a place for Fender, and there's still very much a strong wish and a strong love for our brand, even alongside cultural instruments, which is very exciting for a Western perspective, is that, you know, Steve Lillywhite saw a band at MUCON that were playing very much Korean cultural music and Korean cultural instruments with an acoustic guitar and a bass guitar, electric bass guitar. You know, that mix is something that it just happens because it's an instrument choice. So very exciting to see that happening.
The universal language of music,
yes,
of course, there.
Yeah.
You mentioned Steve Lillywhite, a very famous producer, produced for U2, for the Rolling Stones, among many, many others. You were involved in a keynote interview with him at MUCON. Tell us a little bit about what the two of you talked about for those that weren't able to attend.
Sure. We basically, Steve's got a tapestry of history, just like Fender. He's in his 5th decade, although we were trying to work out how does it work that way when he's only 58. He doesn't like talking about his age, so sorry, Steve. He's got a rich tapestry of history. And, you know, he's working from when he started out as a tape operator. So we talked a little bit about his beginnings. and where he started out as a young boy, and he got a job in a studio as a tape operator. No academic background, just went straight in and did the job, and then worked his way all the way right through to where he is today. Of course, he's recorded some of the top artists around the world. I mean, U2, everyone knows about what he's done with U2. His recent work with the Killers, 30 Seconds to Mars, and an album that he's just finished in LA with the top Latin American artist, which is called Juanes. And that was a very interesting departure for Steve in talking about how he did that. We talked a bit about the culture of a studio environment and how that is, again, independent of race, religion, or genre. You know, the culture that, or the environment that Steve creates is a lot of energy. He gets a lot of energy out of artists. And I was very fortunate to see this actually in action in Singapore, where we brought Steve Lillywhite to Singapore to record a Singapore band. And he chose a band called the Sam Willows. And something he's never done before, multi-vocal harmony. He's never really been into doing bands like that, and it was something that he took differently in what he did. We talked a bit about that experience of what it was like to work with a Singapore band and how that would develop was just amazing. So being here also is that Steve and I are we're going to be selecting a Korean band. And that Korean band will be going to Los Angeles to record with Steve. And that whole process of which band you choose is another thing that we have to consider as we go through this. But it was a very tight, short conversation. A lot of people wanted us to speak for longer. They certainly wanted to hear more from Steve. Steve has been swamped since he did his talk, so I think that you'll be seeing him back here, and certainly coming back to Asia as well, which is very exciting.
We spoke earlier about the music scene in Asia and how you think it's emerging really in a lot of ways. Let's look at Korea specifically here. Of course, Psy last summer really made a lot of waves throughout the world, of course, became a household name throughout the world. And we've seen in recent years the Korean wave really gradually gain traction overseas and overseas markets throughout Europe and the Americas and whatnot. When you look at the Korean music scene right now, what's your outlook? What do you see?
Yeah, I think MUCON put it perfectly last week at the conference. Their driving statement, beyond genre. I think that's actually a very important statement that was made by MUCON that actually clearly identifies there isn't one music genre. In Korea, we have multi-genre. Of course, K-pop reminds me so much of Britpop in the 80s. And in Britpop, we had guitarists. In K-pop, we have dance with musicians. I mean, last week I saw K-pop bands with musicians playing guitar. There are many bands here that are, deemed to be K-pop, but they play guitar as well. So the beyond genre phrase, I think, really identifies where Korea is going. It's not just notified by its pop music. There are hundreds of pop bands, rock bands. Folk is very popular here. The history of Korean music really evolves from folk music, which is very much an acoustic style of playing. And I think you see that when you're in Korea. You see all these music styles. There's jazz. There's so many different music styles. We at Fender wonder how many there are sometimes, and we dread to count how many different music styles there would be, from electronic dance music, which includes guitar sometimes, to right through to rock and pop and jazz and funk and all these things. So there is a broad-based support of all the different music genres. Where Korea has obviously shown its initial success internationally is in pop music, because of our friend Psy. Now, that's where it starts. Although Psy is not new, let's be honest, he's been around,
right.
But the point is that music is across different platforms, different genres, and I think Korea is showing that it has that mindset. It's not just thinking it's only about pop. I had some very interesting meetings with some of the key management companies in Korea who manage a lot of the top artists, and they're already looking at what next. And of course, what next is a different style of music, or a different type of band, or a different type of artist. And of course, you can imagine, if there's music, there's guitars.
I guess a question, though, is there a market there for that? I think there is some frustration within the music industry here that it seems pop music is the only thing that's sort of being promoted and pushed out there.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a market for that.
Yeah.
But is there a market for these other types of music to, for bands from Korea to make it out of the country?
Well, that's one of the things I think Fender can play a role in. We tell lots of stories. and most of our storytelling is in the West. And wouldn't it be great to tell stories of Asian bands in the West? Not necessarily in the West playing whatever, but you know, we have a vast army of artists who we work with directly around the world. But in Asia, we're just beginning. So I think the comment you make and the worry locally, it's understood because it's actually happening a lot in many countries in Asia. This is where commerce is taking over art. It's going to change. It's going to change. Export of music is very important. I mean, Psy proved it. But it won't take just one guy to sing 1-2 songs. It will take a band one day to export. I mean, I've seen so many bands in Asia that have really blown my mind when it comes to what they can achieve. They sing in English, they may sing in a language that is local, of course. But I really think the opportunity of export, let's not forget, export within Asia. And that's another thing that Korea has done very well, exporting bands from Korea to China, to Japan. One of the things that really makes me go, wow, is the support for Korean music in South America. Now, let's just think about that. Korean sung music listened to by Spanish spoken people. But the common denominator, the language is music. And it transcends those different boundaries. And some of these Korean bands have seen more success in South America than anywhere else in the world. And that's just like mind-blowing to think that's happening. Right. So the world is ready for music. It's always been around, ready for music. And I think the moment that we can get more art-driven projects, not commerce-driven projects, and there's a risk with art-driven projects. You know, it's not going to make money from the beginning. Music is not about making money. That's the challenge. I think everyone thinks that it's all about the money. It's not. You speak to any artist, it's about the adoration. The currency of aspiration is being liked, being loved. You know, that's what artists do it for.
Something that has changed the playing field and will probably continue to change the playing field moving forward is the digital age. You mentioned it earlier. IT seems to be permeating music more and more these days. That relationship between IT and music, how do you see the relationship now and how do you see it moving forward?
Yeah, you know, it's very interesting. At Music Matters this year, Vice President of Universal stood up and just reminded everybody that we are just beginning the digital age in music in Asia. You know, iTunes came to Asia in 2012. That's pretty much 10 years after the rest of the world had it. And when you think about that, that actually is creating great opportunities for a lot of artists. A hell of a lot of artists now have a vehicle to promote their music and sell their music. They can go direct and sell without a label. They can do that. Recently, we've had the streaming services. And the streaming services, you know, they get a good and a bad response because obviously, you know, artists don't make as much money from a streaming service. But to be fair, you're being paid on every listen, as opposed to someone owning a product and they can listen to it as many times. So that's a very different digital's created their different mindset. What it's also allowed is emerging artists to get their vehicle, to get their music out there using these vehicles. You know, back in the day when I played, the only way I could get my music out there was to play clubs and pubs and have a record company press singles to be distributed in a store. Distribution of music isn't a physical product anymore, although Japan still is leading the world when it comes to physical distribution because there's that sense of ownership. You know, Japanese fans want to prove that they own this music. You know, they buy 3 copies of the CD, and the Japanese invented the CD, so you're gonna pretty much know that they're going to grab onto it as long as they can. Sure. But digital is changing the way we acquire music and how we listen. It's even changing the way how we produce music as well.
Do you think it's becoming more of a meritocracy? Do you see that kind of playing out, or do you see some of the negative aspects of this creeping in more and more as time goes on?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the phrase meritocracy because I think that's a word that sometimes gets abused in Asia as what is meritocracy. I think that there is some good and bad about what this does. I think one thing that is clearly a problem is there's too much music in some cases. You know, when I say too much, I mean you want to hear good music. And that's really what it's all about. But sometimes we're hearing music that's not really up there. But you can switch off. That's the great thing about technology, is you can switch off and you can switch on to what you want to listen to. The good thing is you're hearing music from everywhere around the world. My daughter lives in London, and when she heard Psy, hey Dad, have you heard this? It's like, yeah, well, you know, yeah, I've heard it before you have, sweetheart.
And you're going to hear it a lot more.
And you're going to hear it a lot more,
Right,
yeah,
sure.
exactly. And YouTube has been a very powerful tool for her to find new music. So, you know, the digital era has created an avenue or avenues to find new music so differently compared to the days of standing around a water cooler and I come up to you, Scott, and say, have you heard the new album from U2? And you say no, and then you will look out for it. So friend-peer ways of developing the likeness and the wanting of music is so different today because we have our friends on social media and we're talking about music all the time.
The current government here in Korea is promoting something called the creative economy.
Yes.
They are, as part of that, trying to promote cultural content, Korean cultural content,
Yep.
overseas. You have experience as part of the advisory board for developing creative industrial technology in Singapore.
Right.
What advice might you give to the Korean government as it makes this push to try and promote these things?
Creative economies around the world have proven that they are actually very important when it comes to GDP. So I think that where countries in Asia have seen this, like Singapore, for instance, and now Korea, there are many ways of developing creative economies. I'm going to say it again, art comes before commerce. And the biggest challenge with governments is that they have to prove that their spending is righteous and it's correct. And you know, it's taxpayers' money. So there's a dilemma. There's a big dilemma in that, you know, key performance indicators tend to get in the way. You know, return on investment is constantly the thing that people think of. Return on objective is what's very exciting, is the fact that you might have an objective to create some sort of opportunity. And I think that's where governments need to move down that pathway, to realize that they need to create objectives and reach those objectives, as opposed to reach a return on the investment. I've seen governments in Asia want to see the monetary return very quickly. And that's a problem because music doesn't do that. It's a long process. You know, music development, artist development is something that is an organic process. You know, spending a week in the studio with Steve Lillywhite, there was no structure. Things happened here, over there, this way, that way. It really wasn't this is the way you do it. And the moment you tell government, civil servants or anyone in government agencies or ministries, they don't grasp that. They can't seem to sort of connect that. So my role is actually play that middleman and say, right, how? Maybe there is a way. Maybe there is a way of trying to connect an objective that is a structured format. It's not been easy, but I'm always very keen for the struggle and the challenges. So.
We'll all certainly be watching as the months and years tick on and looking at how all these things develop, of course. It's all very interesting.
Yep.
Mr. Graham Perkins, we thank you very much for being on the show and sharing your insights today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time, After 10.